Welcome to Dust History. When Viking longships appeared on the horizon, warriors knew they faced death or glory. But for the women watching from shore, the approaching sails meant something far more terrifying. Death would have been mercy compared to what awaited the wives and daughters of defeated men. The chronicles speak of battles won and lost, of treasure seized and monasteries burned. What they don't tell you is what happened after the fighting stopped, when the real nightmare began. We think we understand Viking brutality. The popular image shows us bearded warriors wielding axes, screaming battle cries as they charge into combat. That's only half the story. The other half was carefully hidden from history, buried in unmarked graves and erased from official records. But archaeology doesn't lie, and the evidence it reveals is more disturbing than any Hollywood depiction of Viking savagery. The year was 845 when Ragnar's sons led the great heathen army into Saxon England. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records their victories in clinical detail: York fallen, Northumbria conquered, King Aiel captured and executed. What it doesn't mention are the systematic practices that followed each victory, practices so disturbing that even medieval chroniclers refused to document them fully. In 2019, excavations at a site near York uncovered something that changed our understanding of Viking conquest forever. Archaeologists found the remains of a large wooden structure, initially thought to be a feasting hall or storage building. But closer examination revealed something else entirely. The building contained dozens of small chambers, each with iron rings bolted into the wooden posts. Carbon dating placed its construction precisely during the period of Viking occupation. This wasn't a hall or storehouse. It was a processing facility for human captives. The evidence was undeniable. Soil samples revealed organic matter consistent with long-term human habitation under stress conditions. Tool marks on the wooden posts showed where restraints had been attached and repeatedly replaced due to wear. Most telling of all, isotope analysis of bone fragments found in the structure's refuse pit revealed something shocking. These weren't just any captives. The chemical signatures in the bones showed they were high-status Saxon women, likely the wives and daughters of defeated nobility. Viking law codes, particularly the Icelandic Gragas, provide the legal framework that made this systematic brutality possible. According to Norse custom, a defeated warrior's wife became the legal property of his killer, not as a servant or slave in the traditional sense, but as a forced bride. The law was specific. The claim had to be made within 3 days of victory, witnessed by at least 3 other warriors. The woman's consent was irrelevant. Her resistance was meaningless under Norse law. But forced marriage was just the beginning. Archaeological evidence from sites across the former Danelaw reveals a pattern of systematic violence that went far beyond individual acts of brutality. These weren't random acts of soldiers drunk on victory. This was organized, institutionalized, and woven into the very fabric of Viking society. As the great heathen army pressed deeper into English territory, every raid followed a predictable cycle: battle, plunder, and then processing of captives. The Norsemen understood the economic value of human cargo far better than most realize. Ships returning to Scandinavia weren't laden only with silver and spices. They carried living cargo destined for slave markets in Dublin, Birka, and even as far east as Baghdad. Contemporary Arabic sources describe slave caravans winding along the Volga River, carrying pale-skinned women from the British Isles as exotic commodities for wealthy caliphs. In Dublin, the Norse established not just a trading post, but a thriving slave market that endured for more than a century. Excavations at Wood Quay uncovered rows of stone-built warehouses, their floors carved with drainage channels, not for rainwater but to deal with the waste of human captives held for weeks or months. Iron shackles designed specifically for women's wrists and children's ankles lay buried in the foundations. On wooden docks, dendrochronology shows continuous rebuilding efforts from 841 to 970, a clear sign that this port's growth was driven by the slave trade rather than fishing or fur commerce. Inscriptions carved into runestones across Schleswig record sales contracts for captives, naming price, age, and condition. 20 silver marks for a young woman, one reads, 15 for a mother, another, 10 for one injured in capture. These runic receipts demonstrate the chilling precision with which the Norse commodified human beings. What's more, stepped-up forensic studies on skeletal remains from bog burials around Port Morrow reveal patterned violence, skull fractures from blows delivered post-capture, shattered forearms from defensive wounds, and blade marks indicating execution-style killings days or even weeks after the battle. One of the most harrowing discoveries came from a monastic site outside Repton. Here, the skeletal remains of 236 individuals were found in a mass grave. Nearly all were women and children. Many showed signs of prolonged agony, sharp stones embedded in the pelvic bones, drilled ankle shackles, and cut marks consistent with ritual strangulation. Soil core analyses indicated multiple events over decades, not a single massacre. It became clear that this was not a chaotic wartime atrocity, but a systematic process of eradication. Further north, on the steppes of Russia, the tale is no less grim. At Staraya Ladoga and Novgorod, Norse merchants recorded slave manifests in carved wooden ship logs, 24 captives, ages 12 to 45, no injuries, followed by daily entries noting the purchase and sale of human flesh alongside amber and furs. The shipping manifests survived because they were used as talismanic declarations, intended to invoke divine witness over these transactions. The irony is brutal. The same men who worshipped gods of fate and honor bound their fellow human beings as merchandise. Behind every entry in these logs was a woman whose life was stripped of agency. Once claimed under Norse law, she ceased to be a person and became property, a kona, an owned woman. Forced to marry her captor, she carried his name, bore his children, and lived under his absolute control. If she resisted, Norse legal texts stipulated a horrifying punishment, burial alive in shallow pits designed to suffocate her slowly. Archaeological test pits in Dublin and Hedeby bear witness to these macabre burials. Small pits too deep to stand or lie down in, lined with stones to prevent escape, sealed only after days of gasping for breath. Amidst this horror, rare voices of resistance emerge from the records. In 923, a woman known as Gunhild the Liberator led bands of freed captives in raids against Viking outposts along the French coast. Contemporary Frankish annals credit her with destroying multiple slave markets and executing slave traders. Yet even in her rebellion, the cycle of violence begat more violence. Gunhild's story reminds us that, for some, survival meant becoming predators themselves. By the mid-10th century, the infrastructure of Viking slavery had become astonishingly sophisticated. Shipyards in Hedeby specialized in building vessels with reinforced holds and ventilation shafts designed to transport human cargo safely over long distances. Maritime archaeologists have recovered timbers from wrecked ships showing iron brackets for securing shackles and carved wooden cogs for adjusting support beams as necessary. These were no makeshift prisons at sea. They were purpose-built slave transports, floating factories in which hundreds of women endured weeks of confinement under inhumane conditions. Once ashore, the captives entered a network of processing centers. In Norwich, excavation of a riverside compound revealed long, narrow cells with stone thresholds and barred doorways. Animal remains found alongside human bones in refuse pits suggest captives were fed minimally while awaiting sale or forced marriage. A small lead tablet inscribed with Anglo-Scandinavian runes detailed the names, ages, and conditions of women held there, clear evidence that human trafficking was formalized under written contract. The social fabric of Norse settlements reflected slavery's centrality. Legal assemblies, or things, routinely included clauses about the sale, division, and inheritance of thralls. Saga literature, often dismissed as fanciful, repeatedly mentions concubinage and forced unions without moral condemnation, suggesting cultural acceptance of women as chattel. Even religious centers were complicit. Excavations at Durham Cathedral precincts uncovered the remains of women, likely former captives, buried inside consecrated grounds, often a sign that a benefactor had granted them Christian status through posthumous baptism, transforming property into souls for church profit. Across the North Channel in Ireland, Norse Dublin's White Tower excavations revealed a brick-lined chamber with drain pipes and bedding planks, likely a holding area for those refusing to cooperate. Flanking walls bore incised tally marks indicating days of confinement. Nearby, cereal grains found pressed into floor crevices hint at starvation tactics designed to break captives psychologically before sale or ritual branding. Contemporary Irish annals speak of women's cries louder than wolves, a poetic but chilling clue to the trauma endured within these walls. In the legal codes of the Icelandic Commonwealth, later codified in the Grágás, forced marriage was enshrined with surprising detail. A man claiming a wife had to publicly announce his claim and present libation in her honor, a twisted ceremony that ritualized possession. If another man contested within 3 days, the claimant risked forfeiting both bride and battle booty. This codified system reveals that what outsiders view as barbaric was, to the Vikings, lawful and regulated commerce. However, not all women acquiesced. Oral traditions preserved in Icelandic sagas tell of shield maidens and noblewomen who escaped captivity by feigning compliance until they could overcome their captors. Archaeological evidence from Birka includes a female skeleton interred with a sword and shield, an anomaly in a cemetery dominated by male warrior burials. Analysis of her isotope suggests she was born in England, likely a high-status captive who earned her freedom through combat skill. Her grave stands as a testament to defiance amid systematic subjugation. These stories of resistance are rare but significant. They remind us that even within entrenched systems of violence, human agency persisted. They also underscore the importance of rigorous historical scholarship to separate legend from fact. Though the popular image of Vikings emphasizes raids and battles, true comprehension demands acknowledging the grim realities faced by the wives and daughters of conquered warriors. The legacy of Viking enslavement and sexual violence endured long after the era of the longships had passed. Norman conquerors inherited the very infrastructure of human trafficking, repurposing Viking pens and ships for their own campaigns. Domesday records list female dependents alongside livestock, indicating that the exploitation of captive women was seamlessly integrated into medieval economies. Castles in Normandy feature hidden cells designed for women alone, their walls scarred by iron fittings that once held shackles. Subsequent excavations reveal infant remains in refuse pits, evidence of deliberate infanticide to eliminate the proof of forced unions. Genetic studies confirm the deep imprint of these practices on the modern population. Mitochondrial DNA analyses show that an estimated 60% of Icelandic maternal lines trace back to women of Celtic origin. In Norway, roughly 40% of female ancestry can be linked to British Isles lineages, an echo of the extensive Viking slave trade. These statistics are more than numbers. They represent thousands of women torn from their homelands, forced into marriages, and often stripped of identity. By the 11th century, church authorities began to question the morality of slave trading, but their condemnations were half-hearted. Instead of abolishing the system, they regulated and taxed it. Human cargo in London paid customs duties, generating significant revenue for cathedral treasuries. Monasteries across Europe held slaves as laborers, their status indistinguishable from cattle in account books. Even as Christianity spread, the commodification of women persisted under a veneer of legality. Modern archaeology continues to shed light on these dark chapters. Recent digs in Dublin's Wood Quay uncovered drains carved into warehouse floors, originally built in the 9th century to accommodate standing pens for captives. At Repton, new soil cores reveal successive burial layers of women killed to prevent capture during military defeats, each layer separated by decades, underscoring the persistent fear of captive enslavement. In Sweden, museum exhibits now display iron shackles and wooden door planks from Hedeby's slave quarters, reminding visitors that the Norse world was built on the backs of countless unnamed women. Confronting these truths is uncomfortable, but necessary. It challenges romanticized notions of Viking heroism and exposes the human cost behind legendary conquests. Acknowledging these atrocities honors the memory of those who suffered and died without voice. History must serve as a mirror, reflecting both our achievements and our darkest impulses. In the end, understanding what Vikings did to the wives of defeated warriors reveals more about our own time than theirs. It forces us to examine the systemic exploitation that persists in modern forms of human trafficking. The past is never truly past when its echoes resonate in the present. Now, as you reflect on these stories of silence and suffering, consider what responsibility we hold today. If history's shadows teach us anything, it's that indifference enables atrocity. We can choose to remember, to research rigorously, and to raise our voices for those who cannot. And if you value detailed histories that uncover truths hidden by time, subscribe to our channel. Like this video if you found it illuminating, and leave a comment below. Tell us what city you're watching from and what story you want us to explore next. Your support helps us continue this work, shining light into history's darkest corners.